Okay, so we'll kick things into gear since we got a lot to talk about today. First and foremost, can everyone see the screen clearly? Should I like close these blinds a little bit more? Everything all good? All right. Let's see. So we're gonna first start off by talking about what we're gonna talk about today. The class topics today will be mainly reiterating over Node.js, and we'll be talking about two new libraries, well, three new libraries. One, which is the FS package, which helps us manipulate files. So we're going to be writing to files, we're going to be reading to files, we're going to be appending to files, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Axios, which is a HTTP request library. You can think of Axios as like JavaScript's AJAX. It helps you make GET requests, POST requests, delete requests, things like that. So those are going to be our main focuses today. But the very first things on our mind would be the pre-class drill. So first of all, raise your hands if you guys got a chance to take and complete the drill. Just one? All right. So we'll look at the solution then for the drill. It should be very similar, as I heard, to a drill you guys have done before, or an exercise you've done before.
It's actually not similar.
Oh, it's not similar?
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's instead of it's taking in an array and then
Yeah.
seeing if
They're duplicates.
inside rather than
Okay, no problem. So we'll take a look at the solution, and I'll select that out as well. First, let's understand the question. Write a function that takes in an array of integers, and that array with duplicates removed. Pretty much, you need to remove the duplicates in an array. The typical input would be, like for example, 1, 2, 2, 3, and the answer you would receive would be 1, 2, 3. An input would be like 4, 5, 4, 4, 7, 5. You would remove all the additional 4s, and you would just have a 4, 5, 7. So let's take a look at the solution. First of all, you need a function that takes in an array of numbers. So it'd be function. The parameter would be an array of numbers. Remember that the name of this parameter doesn't matter. It could be named anything. So then for this solution, we're going to create a kind of like a holder array that's going to take in all the unique numbers. And let me also make this bigger. We're going to create a for loop. Oops. That iterates through the array that we're passing in. So from the beginning of the array, from index 0, we're going to iterate through to the length of that array, and then increment every index by 1. So then so in the if conditional, what we're checking over here is we're using a function called includes. This is a built-in function for the array object. What it does is it checks to see if the value that you're passing into the parameter of that function exists in that array. So we're saying new array, does it include the number that we're iterating through right now at the in the function that we passed in? And if it doesn't include it, that's why we have this exclamation point. This exclamation point inverses the Boolean value. So if you do exclamation point false, it'll invert it to be true. Exclamation point true inverts it to be false. So we're saying if this new array does not include the number that we're iterating through at this time, push it to the new array. So the new array now has that unique value because it doesn't already have that number. Else, console log out this array already contains the number at the time, and goes on about its business. It iterates through the entire array, and then just console logs out the new unique array. So when we run this, we do node test.js. We're passing in an array of 1, 2, 2, 3, and the array we get back is 1, 2, 3. Questions on this solution? I'm going to Slack it out, but I also want to I provided you the link earlier on the includes function. So let's do this snippet. All right. So this website, developer.mozilla.org, is pretty good resource for discovering new JavaScript functions. The includes function might be new to you guys, and if you guys see a new function that you've never seen of before, the first thing you should do is Google it because you want to know what does it do. And it's pretty much saying that for the array objects, there's a function called includes, and it gives a little demo that this method determines whether an array includes a certain value among its entries, returning the Boolean value true or the Boolean value false as appropriate. And it gives you a whole bunch of different examples on what that does. So with array 1, 2, 3, console log out, does array 1 include 2? We're expected output is to be true. And then if we hit run, you'll see that it is true. Same thing with pets. Does the pets include cat? Yes, it does. That's also true. Same thing with the value at. Does pets include at? Technically, it does, but it's looking for the unique value at, not concatenated into a string. So the expected value is false. And the nice thing about this website is that you can remove examples, create your own examples, add to examples. Is a good playground for when you're trying to experiment with new functions. So just keep that in mind. So any questions on the drill? Yeah, if you didn't get a chance to complete it, definitely look at the solution. Make sure you understand the solution, and maybe add to it should you so feel the need. Okay. Is there a question over here? Okay. I thought you had a question.
Yeah. Did we select out the solution to that?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Let's see. The very first solution, exercise we're going to work on today, I'm going to slack it out to you guys. I'm going to do this for about 10 minutes. Let me just get all that information for you. Saturday class. For this first exercise, you're going to do this independently. We're going to start from a blank JavaScript file. We're going to create a Node application, which is really just a JavaScript file, that takes in 2 command line arguments and checks if they're equal. If the 2 numbers are equal, then output true. Otherwise, output false. And if you guys finish this quickly, there's a bonus point to check if the 2 numbers are multiples of 7. So first of all, as with all things, make sure you understand the question. What am I asking for? I'm asking you to take a blank JavaScript file. I'm asking you to create a function that takes in 2 arguments. You want to remember, how do I use arguments on the back end in Node? You should have seen this in exercises for the previous class. You're going to use the process arg keyword to be able to utilize the arguments being passed in. So you're going to pass in 2 command line arguments, and all you're going to check is to see if they're equal. What do you guys use in JavaScript to confirm if an object is equal to another object? Someone shout it out.
Equal operator?
Equal operator. And if you want to be strict, how many would you use? 3. You would use 3. And then when you figure out if they're equal to or not, as you can see, output either true or false. What does that indicate? What was that? You're console logging, but also it infers that there's 2 use cases. There's 2 paths. When there's 2 paths of logic in code, what does that infer? What type of logic is that?
Boolean.
It's a Boolean you're printing out, but what does it infer? There's branches in logic. How do you build branches of logic in code? If-else statements. You're going to need conditionals. So you're going to need one branch that checks to see if they're true, and another branch that checks to see if they're false. Definitely try to get used to using these keywords. When you do take interviews, they're going to want to know that you understand the term conditional. Even if you know, yeah, a conditional is an if-else, yeah, we're just going to use if-else here, they're going to want to hear you use that keyword conditional. Because a lot of the times, sometimes, you know, you're going to talk out the problem first before you ever get around to coding it. And you want to make sure that you're explaining things in a way that everybody understands. So let's do this for the next 10 minutes. So at 10:21, we'll take a look at the solution.
Oh, probably not. We would have to do that. Not that much. Oh, is that what it is?
So
Question?
in the bonus section,
Mhm.
the numbers have to be equal and multiples of 7? And
Either or, because I mean, if it's 7, it is a multiple of 7, so that already handles both cases.
Okay, so I guess both the numbers are equal and they're multiple of 7.
Oh, that's what you mean. No, that's just asking to see if they're both multiples of 7, not that they're equal.
So it doesn't matter whether they're equal or not.
Yeah.
Okay. Modulus 7 equals 0. Yeah, something.
It's a good
Yeah. So let's do say 14, 21.
All right, 5 more minutes, and then we'll talk about a solution. And remember, if whenever in doubt, if there's something you don't understand in this question, Google it. There's a lot of solutions out there. Stack Overflow is your best friend.
already did. Let's do it in the house, right? Yeah,
Get it? That's why you're the teacher. I didn't go into my classroom and say, I'm sort of not that's not the point. The point is them being able to do it back and being successful. That's what it's your joy from that saying you're the smartest person in the world. You get paid to be the smartest person. What you just do a blog, manifesto. Manifesto. Like the first opening was in my blog was where you
Okay, let's take a look at the solution. Could you raise your hand so you were able to at least complete the first part of this activity? Cool. If you didn't arrive late and you had the full amount of time and you were unable to, definitely take some time out of this class to have a conversation with the TAs to try and figure out where exactly things went wrong. Because this should really just be an iteration of the basics. We're going to start from scratch. The very first thing in this question is create a blank JavaScript file. Test.javascript. That is a simple command on your terminal. If you do have a terminal, if it's a Mac, you would do touch.js and then open up the file in an editor of your choice. Next, it says create a node application. You can almost ignore that as just filler text. The next important thing in this is takes in 2 command line arguments. Let's tackle that first. I believe it is process.argv is what we use and to get the arguments. Let's console log that out. Process.argv. So when I go to my terminal and I type in node test.js just to run that blank node file with the process.argv, what do I see? It's gonna already have arguments in it. This is very important because sometimes you might be confused why the very first index of your arguments is not the numbers that you passed in. So it's going to pass you back an array, and that array is going to include one, the node how can I say, executable that I'm using that exists on my laptop, and then the second argument is going to be the actual file that I'm executing, which is test.js. So if we know index 0 is taken and we know index 1 is taken, that means the only other numbers that I pass in would be from index 2 and above. So if I do test 1, 2, 3, we're going to see that at index 2 we have 1, index 3 we have 2, index 4 we have 3. Console log, console log, console log. Whenever you don't understand something, start from the beginning and just print out every single step. That's how you'll learn how to do these type of questions, especially in a high-stress environment like an interview. So now that we know the indexes we need in process argv, we can assign them to variables. For a equals process argv index 2. That'll be the first number I pass in. Same thing for variable b is going to be the third index, which will be the second number I pass in. That's all I care about. The question only asks me to pass in 2 command line arguments. I'm only going to take in 2 command line arguments. If I pass in a third, I'm just going to ignore it. So now checks to see if they're equal. That should just be an if conditional that you've seen before. If a triple equals b. Open and close brackets, that creates the scope, and then I'm going to console log true. So we're just going to test that very first case before we do anything else. Test, 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 console log, console log, console log. So we're going to pass in 1, 2, 3. I'm doing that just for testing purposes because I only really care about the first two arguments that I pass in. So when I do this, nothing. What went wrong? All right, let's find out. Did I hit save? Let's console log A. Let's console log B. Let's debug. Let's figure out what's happening. Let's run this test again. Okay, so now we're going to see that we have it's taken in the 1 parameter that I passed in, and it's also taken the 2 parameter that I passed in as A and B. Then we're going to notice that, oh, wait a second, this only gets executed if they're true. That's why I didn't see anything. This is how you guys can identify lapses of logic or things that you're missing. So now that we know that it's only going to print out when they're equal, I'm going to only pass in equal numbers, 2 and 2. And you're going to see it's going to print out true. So now the third case of this question says, if the 2 numbers are equal, print out true, otherwise output false. So now I know I need a second, I need an addition to my if conditional. I'm going to type in else block console.log false. So if it's true, if the 2 numbers are equal, it will print out true. If they are not equal, it will print out false. Equal case, true. Not equal case, false. That's it. Now the bonus part of this question, and actually, does anyone have any questions on what you've just seen so far? Does anyone have any questions on why they might not have gotten to this point? Don't be shy. We're all here to learn. So I'll walk around anyway, so you guys can ask me privately as I'm doing my rounds. But for the bonus, check if your 2 numbers are both multiples of 7. Sometimes this can change on the language that you're writing. Let's say eventually you evolve past JavaScript and you're writing Go or Python or Ruby or whatever. They might have some small differences. So let's go to Google. Let's confirm, like, what is the function or keyword you use to discover whether two numbers are multiples of a number. So I go to Google, I type in JavaScript, which will be the first indicator of the language that I want the search query to focus on. So it'll be JavaScript, how to find multiples. All right, and the very first link I see is JavaScript, how to tell if one number is a multiple of another. I'm going to open that up. Blah, 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 blah. Let's scroll down to the answers. It says use the modulus operator in JavaScript and PHP, which returns the remainder when A is divided by B. A modulus B. And the remainder will be 0 if A is a multiple of B. Perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. Keep in mind, you don't always need to know what you're searching for in Google. You could always come to Google and type in, I don't know, JavaScript multiples. Still give you that same, I even misspelled multiples, and it gave me something, pretty much the same link, but you might see like maybe it might be the second or third link in the search. I don't know multiples. Let's see what happens. Still the very first link in Google. This is just an example of showing you that you don't always need to know exactly what you're looking for. If you can piece together what you want in your search query, for the most part, Google will give you a close link to what it is that you're trying to find. So don't be afraid to experiment if you're not exactly sure what you're looking for. Let's see. So what's next? Okay, yes. So now we know we need to use the modulus operator. If A modulus B, well, actually if A modulus 7, because we care if A is a multiple of 7, and B modulus 7. What am I missing? The one I'm missing over here is what they mentioned, that if the remainder is 0, then we know that they're multiples of each other. So we need to say equals 0, and we'll wrap these in brackets too. Okay, I think that looks correct. If A is a multiple of 7 and the remainder equals 0, then it's true, and b is a multiple of 7 and the remainder equals 0, then it's true. And we're,
It's you use double A.
whoops, thank you. All right, there we go. So then we're going to console log out true, else console.log something went wrong. All right, sure. Let's go back to our terminal. Let's test this, confirm that we actually have something correct. If we just pass in the two numbers 2 and 3, those are obviously not multiples of 7, so we hope to see that something went wrong. All right, what is this telling me? Unexpected token and. All right. Where did we go wrong over here? What is and in JavaScript? I forget sometimes.
You close the parentheses after the 0, that closes the if statement.
Whoops. Oh, whoops. Yeah. Good call. Yeah, I do. Let's open this up. Is that what you mean?
It's the mod 7 being in parentheses.
Ah, okay. Right here. But we want this to be, it would be like, well, let's start from the beginning. When in doubt, let's simplify. So this is what I expect to see. That when A is going to check if it's a multiple of 7, and then that should be equals to 0, and 0 is then equal to 0. So let's test that. All right, something went wrong. It's only checking A, remember. So now if I do 7, you're going to see that it's actually true at the bottom. So this, we know this one portion is correct. Now, let's add the and over here and do B modulus 7 equals 0. All right, so now let's see what happens. Something went wrong because they're both not multiples of 7. If I pass in the 7 as well, then we see true. Perfect. You guys see how we walk through those debugging flows? Don't be surprised if you see errors, because errors always happen. Happens to the best of us, even for simple things. But as long as you're able to scale back, rethink, simplify your solution, because sometimes we can get very lost when our code gets really big, really complex, and it can be hard to figure out where exactly things are breaking. Make that code as simple as possible. I always say code stupid first, get smart later. All right. So yeah, questions on this solution. I'm just going to Slack it out in case everyone didn't get a chance to complete it. Mod 7 and equality. So yeah, any questions on this solution and the steps that we took to create the solution? All right. Next, we're going to talk about the FS package in JavaScript, well, in Node. So let's look at FS, Node FS. This is a file system library. Let's going to Slack that out to you guys. In fact, actually, you guys should also Google that too, and then just follow along. You want to type in Node FS, and it'll take you to the Node documentation. When you get to that documentation, let's see. It tells you that to use this module, you have to use constant fs and require fs. The nice thing about fs is that it's built into the Node library, so you don't have to add this as an external library. You don't have to add it to your package JSON. It comes pre-built with no hassle involved. So when you use require fs, these are bad examples. So let me show you an example in our list of examples. Here we go. Really simple. The one function we care about today is going to be called write file. So we're going to do variable fs. Let's make this const because it's not changing. So constant fs require fs, and then we're saying fs. We're going to use this library and we're going to use a function called write file. Let's look at what write file does. Once again, going right back to Google. Node fs write file. Where's a good link? Yeah, let's go back here. Write file. There we go. Let's click on that. So this tells us that fs has a function that we could use called write file. What it does, it takes in three different parameters, which would be the file that we actually want to write to, the data that we actually want to write to that file. We have a list of options, whether the encoding of that file defaults to UTF-8, the mode, and then also the flag. We're going to see it has a W flag, which symbolizes writing. There's also another flag called R, which symbolizes reading. And then it takes in a callback. A callback you want to think of as just a function that helps you handle error cases and success cases. So in the simple example that they've given us over here is we're going to take some data, which is just going to pass in hello node.js. We're going to use the library fs to write to the file. The file at this particular example is called message.txt. So if the file doesn't already exist, it's going to create a file called message.txt. Then it's going to pass in this data, which is hello node.js, and it's going to pass in, and it's going to pass in a function that takes in the error parameter. These parameters don't actually populate until that function is executed. So if there is an error, that means if this error parameter has been populated, it's going to throw that error and we're going to see what went wrong. Else, we're going to assume that there are no errors and it's going to console log out, this file has been saved, this file has been written to, this file is done. Questions on what we think this is supposed to be doing? And then we're... Are you talking about the buffer over here?
What does FS stand for?
Oh yeah, file stream. Yeah. Yeah, good call. They should have said that in the beginning. Let's scroll up. Oops. Let's get rid of that. Oh, file system? Yeah, file system. That's what it means. Cool. Now we all know. So yeah. So let's take a look at the example that we have in our files. This example over here is going to require file system. We're going to take in the constant called fs. We're going to use fs to write or create a file called movie.txt. We're going to pass in a string called inception diehard. And then we're also going to pass in a function er. This is going to, and as I mentioned earlier, this is called the callback function. We're not going to worry about what callback means just yet. You'll learn more about it in future classes. But is there a question back there?
Yeah. So, like, obviously we're passing a string to a text file, so it's like a simple example. But like,
Sure.
What's the capability of write file? Like, I assume you could do kind of any file type.
Yeah, you could do any type of file type. You could change the mode of the file, so whether it has like root access, whether it's specified to different, whether it's only specific users can access it. You can change the encoding of a file from UTF-8 to ASCII. You can do a whole bunch with it. You can pass in, if you're familiar with buffer streams, if you're streaming some text from an external source, you can stream that directly into a file using the file system command, things like that. Yeah, good question. So yeah, so if there is an error will populate and you can console log out what that error would be. Else, it assumes that there are no errors and that just implies that things have gone successfully. And then we can say movie.txt has been updated. So let's run this example. This is example 11. So let me cd into 11. ls write.js is clear. And what we're going to do is node write.js. Movie.txt is updated. You saw over here this popped up, movie.txt. If I do ls, I'm going to see movie.txt and write.js because it's going to create the file if it doesn't already exist. And then when I cat movie.txt, you're going to see that it has inception, comma, diehard, because that's all we wrote to it. If we run this again, who wants to take a guess at what will happen? If I execute this function again, we've already created a file, movie.txt. We've already written to that file, inception, diehard. Just a wild guess of what you assume will happen.
It'll add the same text again.
It'll add the same text again? Anyone have any other guesses? It might give an error. Any more?
Overwrite the file.
Overwrite the file. That's also another
As
option.
long as the file's not open.
Yeah, sure. So as you guys mentioned, it will write the same thing again, overwrite the file, or it might provide us an error. Let's see what happens. This movie.txt was updated. Updated is a confusing term because it wasn't updated; it was overwritten, as you guys mentioned earlier. Lucky for us, there were no errors, and now you can see what actually happens in this use case. So if I go and I add some text here to myself, like I don't know, blah 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 blah. Let's save that, and I execute this file, this code again. Remember, all this code is going to do is going to try to either create a file if it doesn't exist, or it'll access that file and then write inception diehard. And what we've seen is that we're assuming it's overwriting. But what happens if there's extra text in there? Let's see. It was updated. Let's cat movie.txt. It completely erased everything else that I had in that file. That's just to reinforce the fact that it will overwrite everything. So if you update that file externally without using your code base, it will overwrite everything and just put in the text that your code has told it to put in, which is inception diehard. Questions?
If you put FS write file, you can overwrite everything that you just.
Correct.
I was just found out this how you do that.
Yeah, so like for example, we know that we just wrote to movie.txt and it has inception diehard, right? And I have now externally gone to this file and added a whole bunch of random text. When I execute this code again, all it's going to do is exactly what it's been programmed to do, which is either create a file called movie.txt or access a file called movie.txt, write this line of string, which is inception diehard, and that's it. So you're just going to overwrite everything, write this string, call it a day.
So whatever you put in that string is going to stay. Anything else?
Yeah, so all of this is going to disappear. So when I do node write.js, it's gone. Granted, if that's not the behavior that you want, there's other functions you can use to append to a file, to add to a file, to write in the beginning of a file. There's many different ways you can manipulate a file, but for the very base case, easy case, we're just going to overwrite everything and add the text that we care about. And another thing to keep in mind is with this function that you're passing in, not only can you pass in the error, but you can also have access to the data, which should be the string over here. And give me a second because I want to confirm that that's actually correct. If I console.log data, or say this is what was written, let's see what happens when I run this. So if I do node write.js undefined,
You might have to pass in data, make the string a variable, and pass it into the function.
like, let's see, let's do test equals, I don't know, that. We'll pass this in like so, and pass this. All right, let's see. Still undefined. Well, there's a way to do it. I'll Google it. I forget. But there's a way to manipulate the content of your code that you're actually writing. Parse the data? A possibility. I'll Google it later. I don't want to confuse you guys just yet. Okay. So now the next example we'll be looking into is reading a file. We've learned how to write to a file. Now we might. What's up?
The third argument, the second argument is just an integer. If you add a third one, that'll be what was written.
Oh, as in like this would be options
Yeah, something like that.
and then data. All right, let's try that out while we're still here. Data. Let's console. Let's execute. Okay, we'll circle back to it later. Good try though. We're all here to experiment.
Can I ask you a question? What if we want to put two strings? Like
Two strings?
2 lines, yes.
You could potentially maybe do like a new line character over here and type in this is the second line. Let's try that. Node write There we go. And that's how you want to have 2 lines. So we just pass in directly into the code a new line character, and that would add a new line. Sure. So now we've learned about writing to a file. Now the next case that we want to care about is reading from that specific file. So in the next exercise, we're going to once again use the FS library, and instead of the write file function, we're going to use the read file function. Now with everything, let's go to, yes, let's search read file. There we go. Nope, that's not what we care. Here we go. Read file. So in the read file function, we're going to see that it takes a path, which we're going to assume is the path to the file name. We can have options whether we're reading the file in the specific encoding type. The flag is going to default to R. That means this is going to be a readable file. And then we're going to pass in a function, and that function takes in an error param, and it also has a data param. Now data should be the data that we're reading from that file. So if we say fs.read file, we're going to read from the etc password file. Assuming there are no errors with reading this file, assuming this file is readable, because as I mentioned, files can be of different types. It could be a writable file. It could be a readable file. It doesn't have to be. But if this file is readable, then we should see no errors, and it'll console log out that data. So let's see that in action. So we're going to use the fs library as we saw earlier. We're going to do fs.readFile movies.txt. What is in movies.txt? Inception Die Hard. We're going to read this file is going to be of encoding UTF-8. This is important. I believe it doesn't work unless you provide an encoding, because you need to say, how do I want you to read this file? Do I want to read it as raw data bytes, or am I going to read it in a format that you can read, or that you can actually understand, which would be UTF-8? And then you're going to pass in a function with an error and a data param. And if there is an error, we're going to console log that out and call it a day. Else, we're going to assume everything went correct. It's going to console log out that data, and then we're going to do other stuff. But I'm going to comment that other stuff out and start with the basic case. So let's just run this example. cd out cd12 read file. All right, read.js node read.js. All we should see is Inception Die Hard. Inception Die Hard. We can understand it. What happens when I remove UTF-8? Let's find out. If I run this again, it's going to pass back a buffer object. A buffer object is going to be the raw bytes of the file. We can't understand raw bytes because we're not computers. We need something that we can read. It's going to turn that buffer into an object that we can actually read. It's going to convert it into UTF-8 encoding, and that's how we're able to read it properly in English. It's going to convert those characters into a format that we understand. Any questions on that? Question?
Are those quotations important? When you were on number 11,
yes.
I noticed that Die Hard and Inception didn't have the quotations running, but it still works.
These quotes?
Yeah. Like Inception doesn't have the final end quote at the end.
The end quotation
Die Hard
mark.
doesn't have it.
Oh, as in like what exactly do you mean by like?
So quotation marks, like you see how UTF-8 has the quotation marks on both ends?
Yeah.
So if you go back to right,
It's right here. Oh, do you mean like why I didn't write those quotations into the file?
No, he's saying he assumes that Inception, there should be a double quotes after Inception,
correct.
and then a double quotes before D, and a double quotes after Die Hard. He assumes.
Oh, because this is all one line.
Yeah, it's all one.
Yeah.
Why isn't it
Cool.
logging then this is the second one?
I'll be right to you. This is the second line? It did. We did another example where it did that. Yeah, this is a different movies.txt. Yeah. Question?
So like when you didn't put the encoding right, it
Mhm.
returns a set of like, I guess what exactly is that like
Yeah, that would you would think of that like it's probably a very bad comparison, but you can think of just like the memory, the computer bytes, the byte flow of that file, like the raw bytes of it that sits in your computer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like, this is a little off topic, I guess, but just real quick, like, so your operating system is like 64-bit or 32-bit.
Correct.
Would that change if you had a different operating system on different bits, like with the return values, or is it dependent on what part of the memory part?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I would assume that the bytes values would differ based on your operating system, whether you're in Windows or Mac OS or a Linux computer, because it would save those bytes differently based on the underlying architecture. Yeah. So those bytes should change, but I would have to Google that to confirm. So I haven't tested that. I've been living in Mac world for so long. So, yeah. Other questions? That was a good question. So now in this example, is then asking us to split the line by commas. We know that movie.txt has one comma over here. So what we're assuming is that if we're going to split by commas, that's going to provide us an array. So in array index 0, we should see inception. In array index 2, we should see, or index 1, we should see diehard. So we're going to use a variable called data array. That data is what we're reading from the file, and we're going to split it by the comma, data.split. When in doubt of functions, if you wanted to figure out what split does, where would you go? Google. Could someone Google that for me and provide a link on Slack? I'll wait. We'll figure this out together. Feel free. Anybody. I don't care if there's like 10 different links. I'll click all of them.
I will send you a link for what the split function is.
Yes. All right. Perfect. We use developer.mozilla, a great resource for figuring out things like this. And we can see that for the string object, there exists a split function. And that split function, to provide an example over here, where it says, string, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, and they're spaced out with individual spaces in between each individual word. That string is going to split by those spaces, and then it's going to console log out that array. I'm going to erase all this other stuff because I don't care about it. All I care about is that array that it creates. So then we're going to click run, and we're going to see that it gives us back an array with the spaced out words in their own individual index in the array. Does that make sense for everybody? Cool. There's a, something, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, they just printed out the actual explanation. That's good too. So yeah, so let's look at the code again. We're going to split that movie.txt by the commas, and then we're just going to console log out data array. There's no read.js, and you can see here's the array. Inception and diehard. This is a good use case for when you are parsing, let's say a CSV. We could have like a comma delimited CSV, which has a whole bunch of different data points on each individual line, and you would read every single line and then break those data points into maybe columns on the back end that you can manipulate. That's how I've used split in the past when parsing files that have a common separator between each individual data point. Questions on that? Or if that was just a whole bunch of words and you guys didn't understand anything. Cool. All right, now we're going to move on to an exercise to reinforce all the things that we have learned so far. Let's see. This would be exercise 13. It's called Best Things Ever. I'm not really sure why it's the best thing ever, but you're going to do this in partners, and I'm going to slack out the instructions. So let's read the question. It says, and actually when you guys open up that exercise, if you look in the solved folder, we're going to provide, the only thing we give you is a text. And that text file is going to be best underscore things underscore ever.txt. And it's going to have lazy boy recliner, massage, meditation, all these different things broken up by commas. So we're just going to assume this is an exercise using the split command that we just learned about. Let's look at the actual instructions. Create a node application. This is just a JavaScript file that reads the best things ever text file. That's the text file sitting in unsolved. It parses the comma separated elements, which means we're going to use the split function to break it up into an array. And ultimately, console logs out each element in the file on separate lines. Hint, if you're struggling to figure out how to loop your way through the text, look at the split method. We've already done that. And your final output should look something like this. We are going to do this for the next, how much time do we have? Let's do this for the next 15 minutes. So at 11:10, we'll take a look at the solution. Definitely, you guys should all have the exercises. If you don't, speak to me or one of the TAs. You're going to be heavily using that read file exercise. Might want to look at 11 just as a pure reference, but you should have all the tools available to you for you to do this successfully. So feel free to work in partners if you want. If you want to do this by yourself, that's also okay.
I think that's what it's with the, it takes everything in the file.
Yeah, maybe they're removing. Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, yeah. Google that one.
Yeah, the file and that file.
Right, file.
No, we're good.
Yes. So wherever you execute the file, it writes into that specific path.
Because later on, they usually require all the areas from there.
You could, but you have to get the full path.
Yeah, just here, I'm talking about here. And then else. And then the rest of your code. You're good there. You're bringing it down.
Yeah,
Everything else.
Yeah, but you still have to put else here. Just good practice. You're bringing it down. Splitting it. And you're opening up everything. And you're there you go. No, that's still, remember, you don't have to call it, you can call it XJY, you put your name there. No, only time you'll see ES6 is what he's using up there like for months. Right now, you're still in ES5. Yeah, because in ES6, you won't use just the Jews for each. It's shorter code, so every edition that you go, you'll notice, and you use shorter code. So sometimes
So you created here.
like 2 or 3 lines of code. Yeah, there's
What I'm saying is you created a file, not inside the console, you created.
you're doing a port in it. So basically, you can use that to translate skills in the that's for natural. Because this is basically a function. So you want to do like skills so you know what to do. This is basically for everything jargon and the properties. It can work, like I said, it can work. It's not a good idea. So it works, but you'll get caught up on that.
So would this be a better way to
There you go, yeah. So right now, it's saying, well, you just do it. But every, and then you'll, every note and that array will just do that. That's ESS. Yep. Yeah, but you see how much now short code that you have to look for. So, thank you. Yeah.
Just instead of writing it on one line, just use the plus.
Go back and change.
Yeah, if we just made it,
Basically,
go
you
back
can
this.
find those comments so that it's equal with the comments. Basically, not by column, but by space.
So we're going to put them in that regular way.
Yeah.
None of them have.
Yeah. Schwartz.
None of them have.
It's less than
If you
2.
do just space.
Yeah, but you'll get there.
When it's comma, it's using the full. Because if you take your rate, it will take each separate.
Yeah, but once you get it like this,
Yeah, the first one is the file rate.
Everything else is.
That's like,
That should be.
yeah, it's just,
This one? This one is only, but this one.
Everything happens.
Now,
it's just,
Oh, I see. Nothing in the file.
just remember, you have
Take it easy.
the
Something like that.
code's already there for you.
We don't do space, this is like.
You got good?
Put everything up here, lazy.
Where's the J Mel? Where's the J Mel? The J Mel. Yeah, for the iPad.
Oh. So it's
He literally built them a mount with his iPad out of cardboard and binder clips. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I just made a stand so I can stand my
Yeah.
iPad and use it as a second screen.
That's
I mean,
cool.
it worked. It worked.
Hey, it just works. Yeah.
These guys were making fun of me last class.
Yeah.
I don't know how superior your setup is.
Only whatever. Yeah. So that's what they're about.
Yeah, this is the exact same files that actually copy and pasted it.
Yep, it's the exact same code. That's like a good exercise to walk through.
It's not working.
They don't take pictures.
We're good, we're fine.
Okay.
We're just playing around with it.
I think you will like this a lot more. I think
5 more minutes, and then we'll take a look at the solution.
That's like I do believe that.
No, I know what it is. I saw it.
Let's do this.
Oh, that's what it is, yeah.
Let's do that.
Look at that.
Then put the word break in different places and see if it automatically.
With this one,
Oh, sometimes you can ask.
yeah, because we have when it comes to not split one and the one after. Oh, you have it?
Override everything. Copy
I'm not hungry right now, but I guess by the time we're finished, I'll be yeah, we're gonna join us for some carb.
Carb? No carbs. That's what I'm saying. You just want to be nice, say something nice, but you know that I'm not able to, I'm not going to go.
I'm pretty sure Vietnamese, restaurant, they have some
Soup over there. What they do?
Oh, yeah.
I want to, but I have to not. Sorry. So what else? When I was starting, I just like it. I feel good. I feel so much energy. Till the summer at least, they all stay.
Then I guess we have to take yoga during the summer to actually carbs together. Johnny.
What do you mean, pasta or pasta?
Same kind of carbs.
They're different. It can be good carbs and bad carbs.
First with the good carbs.
You can get us through that. Actual trivia. Well, you can go any easier. We're all playing together. You pick this one.
Also should be the same for the fried part, right? On the website.
Sure. Okay.
On the so we were just going to that's what it is. So
Options, that's when you pass in the encoding of that file. Remember how earlier I said without reading a file, if you didn't use UTF-8, then it was just like a buffer. We're saying write UTF-8 to this file so that you can read it later. Yeah, for the errors. Okay.
Yeah, so just explain. So if you have a comma, you'll separate everything more the sense, split it into chunks.
Yes.
When you write the file, you ask me.
Then you would have to identify the user or so if your file has a bunch of commands, then you can just spit it out.
Oh, so there's basically nowhere to, because these are by the comma.
Yes.
So you're saying if there's
Need something that's going to be all right. Cool. Okay, let's circle back, focus back into class, and take a look at the solution. Before we take a look at the solution, I wanted to circle back to the write file example. Remember when I was trying to play around with the actual contents of that file, and I was trying to use the parameter data? I was confusing JavaScript a little bit with a different language. When in doubt, the documentation is pretty clear. That callback only has one param, error. It has no param data. So I was doing something that did not exist in JavaScript. So you got to remove that, and as one of your classmates had mentioned earlier, you got to make sure that data is a variable that's outside, and you pass in that data variable, and then you can now use it within the scope of the callback. So when I go and do node write.js, you'll see that it prints out the lines that I'm trying to write. But the reason we saw undefined before was because I had redefined data over here. Data doesn't actually do anything in this use case. So when I was executing this function, it was showing up as undefined. That's why I was now very confused as to where did my data variable go which had this value over here, and I couldn't use it because it's being overwritten by this parameter, which does nothing. And now this parameter is undefined, and it's console logging out that undefined. So if you want to play around with the code with the text that you're actually writing to that file within the callback, don't make the mistake I made. Read the documentation. Documentation is key, and you can just console log out the variable that you created above. Does that make sense about where I went wrong and what you're actually supposed to be doing? Cool. All right. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, documentation is key. I want to backtrack a little bit before I look at this next solution, and kind of make sure that we all kind of understand some fundamentals behind Node. So last class, was that the first time you guys installed Node to your systems? Okay. How did you install Node to your systems? Okay. So you just downloaded from the website? Did anybody use like Homebrew? Did anybody use NVM?
I have them on my computer.
Okay, cool. Just trying to confirm. So we should all have Node on our computers. If we do not have Node on our computers, then you really need to speak up because we've been talking a whole bunch of Node today, and we need to get those basics sorted out. Always a good form of practice is to confirm what version of Node you're using. Right now I'm on 11.3. I believe it's definitely on something much further than that at this point. So as I mentioned earlier, Node is going to be the way that the Node executable is going to be the way that you execute your JavaScript files. Your JavaScript files, as we saw over here, you can think of the Node output over here as your console in the browser. When you use console.log in your JavaScript file, typically in your browser, in your developer tools, you would go to the console there and then see all those printouts. Instead of going to the console, because there is no console that exists in the terminal, it will go to this output. It would output to your terminal for you to see your different stuff. So when I executed write.js, Node executed the file write.js is gonna print out all of this data because I'm console logging it out to the terminal versus the console. So just want to make sure that was clear. In JavaScript, the way you import libraries that you want to use, you use require. This require is a keyword. It's a reserved keyword in JavaScript that says I am going to import a library that I want to use. So in this case, I'm saying import the file system library, and I'm going to assign it. You have to assign it to a variable called fs. It's just fs for simplicity's sake, but I could have used file system if you want to be explicitly clear that this is the file system library that I'm using at the time. It's JavaScript convention to have them assigned to constants. A constant is saying that this variable is not changing. This library that I've imported is not changing. You might also see var in a few places. I think that goes against convention. The convention is that your library should not be changing in the middle of your code execution. It's going to be a constant variable that you then use throughout the code. So constant, file system, and then require the library that I want to use. The nice thing about fs is that this is a built-in library in Node. So you don't need to install. You don't need to do any npm install from an external source. When you install Node on your computers, brew install Node is going to come with fs by default. So that's why we're able to just say require fs and then use it within my code. Questions on that? All right. So that's some of the basics. Now let's take a look at the solved solution for, well, actually, I want to identify something. So let's go to activities 13, best things ever. Let's go to unsolved. Raise your hands if you're able to complete this assignment. Really should be everybody, because what I'm going to show you what this assignment does is that if we have, Let's call this, I don't know, test.js. We know we need to read from this file. We have a blank file called test.js. I am going to go to the read file exercise, copy and paste, best things ever. I'm going to execute this. That's it. If you were unable to complete this assignment without copying and pasting and changing the name of the file from this exercise, then let us know, because then we can try and figure out where did things go wrong. This exercise is purely just an exercise of reinforcing that you understand how the different pieces work, playing around with the different pieces, knowing that when you pass in a file over here, depending on the location that you are in your code. So for example, right now in my terminal, I am at this location. Blah, 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 blah. 01 exercises, exercise 13, best things ever, unsolved, folder location. If I do ls over there, I have access to the best things ever.txt and the test.js I just created. When you try and read from that file, it is going to read it from the file location that you executed your JavaScript from. So when I did node test.js, I didn't have to put in /user Emmanuel exercise blah 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 blah, because it's just going to assume that best things ever exists in the folder location that the test.js file has been executed from. Remember, this is not a limitation. If you want to read a file from a completely different file location, you need to give it the fully qualified path to find the file that you want to read, and that could be any file. You could also do relative paths, but I didn't want to bring that up just yet. But yes, you can definitely do relative paths, and what that will do is like you could say from this relative path, go up one directory and then use a file in the directory above. That's always good when you're deploying code to external servers. Your current folder structure locally is going to be different from your folder structure in Heroku or AWS. In that case, you would use the relative path from this current execution flow, hop up 2 to 3 directories and read a different file, because you know that file exists in that directory source. So keep that in mind. Any questions on this exercise? What was expected?
I'm getting an output of
Just numbers. Oh, are you using your encoding? That is very important. UTF encoding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to?
I'll show you that.
Yeah. Show me later, and definitely compare and contrast to exercise 12. Because as you saw, I just copied and pasted exercise 12, changed the file being read, and that was it. There's definitely there's a mismatch between your code and then exercise 12. And I would like you to try and figure that out before I get there. All right. Any other questions before we move on? All right. So the next exercise we're going to look at is we've learned about writing to files, we learned about reading from files, and now we notice that when we're writing to a file, it would completely erase everything inside that file and replace it with the contents that we want to write. Now we're going to learn how to append to a file. What this is going to do is it's going to keep on adding to that file and leave all the data that's currently in there as is. So once again, this is going to be a function of FS, file system, and the function we're going to use is append file. So let's look for append file. Nope, not file handle, not promises. Let's look for a simple use case. Okay. In the documentation, is going to take the path of the file that we want to append to. Is going to take in data, the data that we want to append. Is going to have options, which default to UTF-8 for the encoding. And then we're going to have, of course, that error callback. And the simple example over here is going to grab message.txt, is going to append data to append, create an error if there is an error to be thrown, else it's just going to console log out data to append. Same case over here. So we have Inside this folder location, you'll notice that sample.txt does not exist. I would assume, if this is the example, and it's saying this is the file that I want to append to, that if it doesn't exist, it will create one on the fly. So let's see that in action. And let me move this down, this up. Okay. Unsolved, CD, exercise 14, clear. So if I do node append file.js, content was added, sample text was created. And it's gonna and it has undefined in here. Well, what went wrong? Let's see what's happening. So if I go to file.js, this text, okay. I missed a very important part. This is taking in some text as a parameter. As a command line argument. You can see that it's using process.argv. Whenever you see this keyword, this should indicate it's taking in an argument from the command line. And it's going to be of index 2 because we already learned earlier the index 1 will be the location of your node executable. Location, well, that would be location 0. Location 0 would be the actual file that you're executing, and index 2 would be the actual parameter we want to take in. So let's pass that in. I don't know. Test 1, 2, 3. Content was added. Let's go to sample.txt. As you can see, it's going to append test 1, 2, 3. It didn't overwrite the file. It just appended to it. And it didn't even add it to another line because technically, I didn't give it any new line characters. So let's say I did want to add a new line character. Let's do /n. And I don't know, cat. Let's append that to the file. Okay. It just appended new line and cat. I'm curious how you would do that, but we'll get to that in a second. The main point of this I want you guys to see is the different options you guys have available to you. You have the ability to overwrite a file completely, and you have the ability to append text to a file. And I am curious, so I'm sure, I just want to do something for testing purposes. If I added a new line over here in that code, and I did cat again, content added, okay, cool. So I want to explain what just happened because I think this is important. When I passed in the new line as a string in my command line argument, it took that verbatim as the complete string that you wanted to add to the file. That's why when we looked at sample.txt, you see new line cat, but it didn't actually convert that new line into a new line in the text. Within the code itself, I added a new line here, and I guess through some JavaScript magic, because what I would expect to see is the same functionality, but we see the behavior has changed. Versus passing new line in and the command line like so, and then actually just adding it to a string inside the code itself. It's converted this string new line, which adds the text that I wanted to add, into an actual new line that gets appended to the file. Then do dog and have them all show up in the sample.txt file. That is funny. I mean, that is important to understand the differences. I can't remember the differences off the top of my head. I'll Google that for you. But the way you identify this type of behavior is through practice, experimentation, and I'm just trying to see when does JavaScript implement some magic and when it doesn't. So, any questions on appending to a file? It follows the exact same format as we did for write file and read file. We're going to import, require the file system library. We're going to assign it to a variable that's going to be a constant. And then for this particular example, we're going to read from our command line an argument, which will be the string that we want to append to the sample.txt. We're going to pass in the location of sample.txt. We're going to pass in the data that we want to append. Pass in a callback with the error param. So in case there is an error, we're going to console log that out. If not, we're just going to console log content added. That's it. Cool. So if there are no questions, we are going to work on another exercise. Yeah, let's work on another exercise for the next 30 minutes until 12. And at 12, we'll take a break and then come back and talk about the solution. So this will be exercise 15. Let me find you guys the instructions. This one you can also do in partners if you feel the need. Question? Oh, yeah, I'll circle back, definitely. So if you guys go to exercise 15, in the unsolved folder, you'll see it provides you guys a whole bunch of different numbers, and those numbers are separated by commas. I'm going to assume this is another exercise where split becomes very important. In the README, it says we're going to start from scratch. What does starting from scratch mean? Create a new, what type of file? New JavaScript file. Build a Node application. Filler text. It's just a JavaScript file that happens to be executed with Node. We're going to call it bank.js, which takes in our user inputs. What can we assume is going on if it's taking in user inputs? Command line arguments. What are the keywords that identify usage of command line arguments? Process arg. So we're going to use process arg to take in some type of input from the command line. Then it says these are the transactions possible. Total, this should tally up all the money in the bank balance and display it to the user. Deposit, and then a second argument, which would be a number, and says this should add a positive amount to the bank balance. No need to display the total here. We're going to have another option, which is to withdraw. That will be the first argument, and then the second argument would be a number, and this should add a negative amount to the bank balance. And then finally, we have one argument called lotto. This should subtract an amount from the bank balance, but if a random number is hit, it should add back a larger amount into the bank balance. Okay, so this will be a tricky one. We'll circle back to that in a second. So for all deposits, withdrawals, or lotto purchases, the transaction should be registered in the bank.text. So let's start from the beginning. We have a bank.text. This has identified all the money we have in the bank if it's all summed up. So we have 1 plus 2.3 plus 4.23 plus minus 2 plus minus 2 plus minus 2.5. All of those are going to add up, and the final value is going to be what the amount of money we actually have in the bank. What kind of strategy can we use to iterate through these numbers and add them all together? And anyone can take a guess before I start calling people out. I'll call out the people who don't like to talk. So someone needs to answer quick. Mr. Raw Hat.